everybody. In all the furor over the banning of TikTok, what's next for TikTok? Lots of talk, lots of controversy, where people go from TikTok. It seems to be grown-ups talking. One thing missing, it seems, from the conversation, if that's the right word about TikTok, is the voice of its users, particularly young people. My guest today, Michael Sayman, has become, in some ways, the voice of young people on social media. He's the author of App Kid, How a Child of Immigrants Grabbed a Piece of the American Dream. He was actually on the show a couple of years ago talking about the book. He's also the inventor of SocialAI, a controversial new bot-based social media platform. And now he has gone back to Facebook where he started. He's joining us. Michael, where are you talking to me from today?
Currently, I'm based out of Connecticut, so I'm pretty close by to New York City.
I'm guessing you're the kind of guy who isn't really based anywhere, though, are you?
That's right. Every time I what do you call it? Have a meeting, it might be from a different place. So that tends to be the case.
So I don't want to put too much pressure on you, Michael. Nobody is nobody is the spokesman of a generation, although you have as much right, I guess, to speak for your generation as anyone. What do you make of this banning of TikTok? Are young people's voices missing from the conversation about what they do and don't want?
I think it's tough because the form of communication, the primary form of communication for each generation, for the longest time has been, while evolving, somewhat similar and understandable between different age groups. I think we've reached a point where some of the technology that we're using is advancing and changing so rapidly that the generations prior really struggled to communicate even at some of the most basic things with some of the younger generations. And that kind of proves a problem, yes, in the conversation around TikTok, but also in the conversations around how parents can even communicate with their kids about what they should be doing or not online, how parents might be able to understand how kids even want to express their frustrations about different issues, or even just as a family, how people are able to, across generations, just understand each other. I think these challenges are bigger today than they've ever been. And I think it's because of that acceleration.
Yeah, it's interesting. Earlier this week, we featured a conversation with one of the icons of the 1960s, Bob Dylan's tour manager, John Taplin, who believes that culture has kind of stood still since the 1960s. We no longer create great music. And also another music writer, David Rowell, who has a new book out, The Endless Refrain, which is about the absence of new music, new creativity. What do you make of that, of the older generation suggesting that there's no culture anymore, that the great songs, the great movies aren't being made? Is this just nostalgia for a different age?
I think in many ways, the type of culture and the type of content that was created at that particular point in time is, I think, very reasonably, you could say, does not exist anymore. That being said, I think it's more of a testament to the fact that there's certain types of content, music, movies, that are created in certain times because of the technology that's available. And so the types of records, the types of albums that would be put out in a time when people had to purchase them as entire individual pieces to play at home when they can, is a very different type of music and creativity that comes out of people than the type of creativity that comes out of a world where you can stream anything on TikTok, on Spotify at a moment, whenever you'd like. This different technology means we have different expressions of creativity. And I think it's kind of true. In the 1960s, maybe there was a type of music, a type of creativity, a type of art that was way more prevalent than today. And I think it would be I think it would be actually rather odd if we had the same type of creativity and format popular today with an entirely different set of tools.
Yeah, I actually agree. And I'm really pleased that you talk about this generational gap, misunderstanding. In the 60s, of course, it was a full-blown rebellion. The kids went out on the street and demonstrated against their elders. Today, it seems to me, and I'm of the older generation, so please correct me if I'm wrong, that it's not a full-blown rebellion, Michael. It's more of a kind of an unease, an unspoken anger or anxiety. How would you explain this generational misunderstanding?
I think it's more about like the mediums in which people choose to express their frustrations or rebellion or just their thoughts and opinions about how things are going on in the world. I think in the past we didn't have like an online public square where one can go and discuss these things with people who are like-minded. Rather, we had to do this stuff in person. And so when somebody wanted to speak out about a cause, they'd go out into the street and they'd speak about it there. And gather around in person. Today, because there are so many different places on the internet where people can just gather virtually, you end up finding that a lot of those people who are frustrated about things in the younger generation will be manifesting similarly, but they're doing so across a different medium. And maybe to those who aren't as much online and don't spend that much time in these public squares on the internet, it may seem rather quiet, but I'd argue it's a different form of communication, a different medium where they're having those loud conversations too.
It's interesting you talk about the public square. Last weekend, the New York Times published an interesting op-ed from an old friend of mine, Clay Shirky, suggesting that progressives in fleeing Twitter, and you've worked with Twitter, they actually brought you on to design a platform more friendly to your generation. The
Yes.
progressives, by fleeing Twitter to other platforms because they don't like Elon Musk and his association with Donald Trump, are giving up on the idea of the public square. Do you agree with Shirky?
I don't think people are giving up on the idea of a public square. The way I guess I would say it is like some people think that maybe X is the public square or Facebook is the public square. In my view, I just think the internet in general is the public square, and these platforms offer different places to, talk about different things, and they have, their own kind of pockets of the internet. And so because of this, I would actually argue that this feels very similar to the era of news, when in the beginning, maybe you had a handful of broad networks, right? National Broadcasting Company, American Broadcasting Company, and these kind of dominated the entire sphere. Everybody would tune into everything. Once television became more accessible and you could have many more channels, you started seeing a bit of a split, especially in terms of news and political content around ideologies. And so you start seeing a lot more fragmented news networks. The collective news that comes out of all of these different perspectives tends to be that public square, that medium, that channel that this content gets distributed through. And so in a similar way, I think a lot of that is happening with the internet, where maybe you had one or two places that everybody would chime in on the same things, because now it's so accessible and so easy to kind of create these websites and these social platforms. I think you're finding a lot more specialized and like more like catered to particular viewpoints, and people are jumping around and using multiple rather than just having one.
And yet, of course, there is this hysteria about social media in particular. The Australians now have legislation trying to ban it for people, I think, under 16. Jonathan Haidt has written a best-selling book suggesting that apps and cell phones have destroyed your generation. Is this just the kind of hysteria that existed perhaps in the 1960s in response to the young rebellious generation then, and it always seems to be a feature of new technology?
In some ways, I think that there is valid concern. There are a lot of issues with new technology when it's brand new and people don't really know the adverse effects it can have over a long period of time. I think it's natural for people to be very cautious with that. And I think they should. I think there are a number of things that we need to just say, hold up, let's see how this plays out. Let's see how it, develops before we allow, young children to just roam free on a new technology that we don't fully understand the implications of, right? And so in that way, I think it's very important. But in a similar way to the point that you're talking about here, like the technology itself is not so much the issue as it is like our lack of understanding of how to use it. And so while some, and Jonathan Haidt, for example, some may argue that like The best recourse here is to like eliminate the tool, that the technology itself is the problem. I might argue that it's the fact that our education systems have not caught up to the technology that's around us to help better inform how we can take advantage of this technology to benefit us. And so, in many ways, I see so many examples of kids out there who, go on the internet, learn by themselves how to use these tools, and are able to build up businesses and support their families and grow, as a person in ways that without this technology would have been impossible for them. But at the same time, we have a lagging education system that does not kind of educate the rest of the population about how these tools can be used to benefit and to grow and to learn. And so we end up having this effect happening. I would separate the two. I would argue that the education bit, I think, is just as important as being cautious around some of these things.
It's interesting you bring up education. I know you believe that college is not the only way to achieve
right.
your career goals. You started programming at 13. You become a big social media entrepreneurial star without necessarily going to college. What then I'm assuming you're thinking that this education should begin in school.
That's right.
What should and shouldn't be taught about social media? If you were in charge of the American school system, if Donald Trump called you up and said, Michael, I need some help in terms of reforming education. He seems to want to reform all the institutions that seem old-fashioned these days. What would you say?
I think it does. I agree with you. It does start at the earliest of ages. I think that, if we're going to start teaching people how to use computers by the time they're in college, we're already setting them up, for an issue, especially because so much of the concern around young generation is those younger kids in high school and middle school that are on the internet using it. And so teaching them after the fact, I think, while valuable, probably doesn't really help with the original issue. To go for that younger, age group and help them learn what are the things that they need to learn about with social media. I think it's pretty simple. What needs to be understood and what needs to be taught is how these news feeds work. How does social media work? What happens when you click like on a post? What happens when you share a post? What happens when you comment on one? How do these algorithms decide what content you see? And understanding that doesn't need to be too complicated. Don't need to understand all the details of the implementation, but to understand at least at a fundamental level what liking a post does and how that affects the content you see on social media feeds and how these algorithms work at that high level, I think it's important. It's very similar in my view as like anything else that could be dangerous or could be helpful. Understanding how it works at the fundamental level, I think can help avoid problems, especially how we educate people around driving and what can happen if you take the wrong turn or if you don't park correctly, what could happen to the vehicle. Understanding these things makes it so that people are able to take advantage of the tool and use it for what they want it to be used for, rather than maybe kind of succumbing to some of the vices that can be found on these platforms.
I'm interested that you say that. Actually, you've gone back to Facebook. For some people, Facebook is exhibit A in the problems with what is called now surveillance capitalism, the way in which people's data is harvested and sold and built around advertising businesses. Do you think that if kids knew how social media really worked and how this supposed free app, whether it's your SocialAI or Instagram or Facebook or X, if they understood how these companies are making money and using their data, it would actually scare them off it?
I don't think so. I mean, I think if they understand how it works, they might feel a little better about it. I think most of the issues around technology that I get a sense from even reading, Jonathan Haidt's book and others is fear because it's not understood rather than fear because it is. And I find that those who understand the algorithms best tend to have the most nuanced take on how this is affecting people and how they might be able to solve it, versus those who maybe don't understand it as much tend to have a lot more fear around the topic. And I'd argue that most young people who don't understand some of these platforms, it's very easy for them to like be afraid of how it works if they have no clue where it's gathering information from or how it understands what they're interested in. Once you understand, and here, this is a really big piece of it, I think, too, is I like to use the example of a movie. When you go see a movie and it's a fun action movie where there's all kinds of things happening, if you didn't know that these were special effects done on computers to make the movie, and you just thought you were watching a film that was recorded of real life, you could get scared about how the implications of the world if the Avengers were real.
Yeah, and actually, interesting enough, when the movies were invented, the turn of the 20th century, when
Yes.
people first saw trains coming at them on the screen, they all ran out of the theater.
That's right. That's right. And in many ways, it's the same. It's the Avengers, the Marvel superhero movies. They look cool, but part of the reason why we don't get afraid is because we know how these movies are made. And so I'd argue that there's something similar to that effect with social media. And I think it's actually really important given how prevalent it is in our lives.
Do you think, you mentioned Jonathan Haidt a couple of times, do you think Haidt understands social media?
I think he understands social media, certainly, but I do think he understands it from his perspective, right? And I think the point of view, while I understand where it comes from, I think it I think it may I think it may be limiting a bit of the potential for these platforms. Now, and I think maybe, like you said, going into the smartphone is the problem. The technology is the problem. I, it's not consistent with the way things have gone for every other technological advancement. For me, it just feels like every technological advancement just increases the potential of every human. Now, the potential being bad, the potential being good is both there. And so to me, that aligns more with each of the past technological advancements in society. And so I feel more comfortable taking that view.
Haidt, of course, writes in many ways, I think, consciously or otherwise, as a parent. You don't have any kids, but if you
That's
did
right.
have kids, Michael, what guardrails would you create? What age would you allow them, and maybe that's the wrong term, to use social media? And what would you tell them? I mean, because as you've noted, social media education is absent from school. You
That's
can't
right.
become a school teacher at home. But what kind of rules would you set if you had kids, or if you've got nephews or nieces or kids of friends?
That's right. I would certainly limit the amount of time that a kid is spending on a platform that they don't understand. And so once the child's able to understand the fundamentals of how these platforms work, then I would be okay with allowing them to use it as long as I'm able to make sure that that platform is being used in the way that they understand and they can navigate some of the dangers. That being said, I think there's a little bit of this almost like helicopter parent that I would want to avoid, especially because we have so many tools that allow for this. And so right now, I can find my iPhone to see any of my friends' locations. My parents, when I was 16, could see my GPS location at all times. That, while it's protective and certainly does protect me from being hurt as a kid, is a very different upbringing than the one my parents had, where when they would leave the house, their parents did not know where they were. If they were hurt, if they were okay, they had no clue. And so you might say, well, that's not a good thing. But in many ways, that lack of ability to track the child
Mm.
in that moment creates an urgency of responsibility on the child to really learn how to do things on their own. And so there's a balance to be had here, right? And that's kind of the take I would have. That's the approach I would have.
Yeah, I agree. And I think when I was growing up, one could escape, if that's the right word, one's parents. They had no idea where you were, go away for months. Um, and it was a much more dangerous world, I think.
That's right.
Today, you've got maybe Jonathan Haidt as the classic hysterical helicopter parent, assuming that everything is terrible, and of course in social media, keeping control of one's kids, when in fact it's a much safer world. You talk, Michael, about kids understanding social media. You made a bit of a noise earlier this year with SocialAI, which is a Twitter-like application or an X-like application in which real people interact with bots. Some people were rather shocked by that. You knew that. You knew that it was going to be a
That's
controversial
right.
app.
Yes.
Coming back to your point about educating young people, when kids use, and I know it's mostly designed for kids, when kids use social AI, do they know that their interactions are going to be with smart machines rather than other humans?
So two things, not designed for kids, but I do see the potential in building something specifically to them. The second point, though, yes, they all know that it's AI. It's intentionally built that way, and I made sure of it. So if you go on social AI and you post and you ask, "Hey, how many of you are human? Are any of you real people?" They all respond back and tell you, "No, I'm not a human. I'm an AI, and I'm here to help you." Right? And so what's really important, I think, is we're entering an era where you don't really know if the person you're talking with on social media is a human or an AI. And you don't really have that context. And when you don't have that, there's a lot of issues that can arise from the emotional reactions people can get from the content that they're seeing. Similar to that idea of people who are new to movies not knowing whether the movie itself is real or not. In this case, we don't really know if some of this AI stuff is human or AI that we're seeing on social media. And so the solution, the ideal solution, would be if we could have a label that says who's a human and who's not. But the problem is technological. We can't just do that. We don't know. And so, because we don't have a way to identify the humans from the AI, I built a platform that allows you to get some value out of the social interface, but one where you're guaranteed that everyone you're interacting with is an AI. And so it's kind of
And they're
another
not really,
risk.
I mean, you use this term everyone. There's probably a better word, everything, because it's
That's
not
right.
really a one, is it?
Yes, that's right. I think the personification of a lot of this can be helpful in certain contexts. So when it's able to help you talk about certain issues, the personification of the tool really helps. But that being said, reminding the user that they are not humans, I think is also important because there's so much emotion attached to what other humans say to us in regards to how we are feeling or how they're feeling. And those emotions a lot of time make it harder for us to get feedback on content. And so I'll give you a good example of how this app has been used in a way that kind of changes things because it's known. People, because they know it's private, because they don't have any humans around in the space, are feeling more comfortable asking and challenging themselves on their own political views, social views, and so on the app because they don't feel this kind of intense emotion when they're debated by a known computer, right? Rather than an unknown potential human. The fact that it's not a public space where all of your people on the internet can see, all the people in your community can see, makes it so that you don't feel a social pressure to necessarily conform to the views that you're seeing on the platform, but rather be open up and be vulnerable about how you feel about things, and that vulnerability actually helps people learn new things and feel more comfortable doing so. So a lot of the value in these types of platforms ends up becoming completely different from what social media's value was, but funny enough uses the same interface and designs that a lot of these social media apps used for people.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're taking the other side of the coin, so to speak, from Blade Runner, the great movie about how to operate in a world where you're not quite sure if humans are machines or
That's
real
right.
humans, which the movie was about the uncertainty. What you're suggesting is that when you only interact with machines, it creates a degree of certainty, of trust. We live in an age where one of the great scarcities is trust. Nobody trusts anything or anyone anymore. But you're suggesting that your generation in particular, although, as you say, it's not just designed for young people, in a world of social AI where all we do is interact with smart machines, with bots, we're more trusting, and it creates a more kind of ontological certainty, and it allows us to develop as human beings. Is that what you're saying?
I'm saying it allows us to develop a healthier relationship with the internet because we're more honest about what the potential is that the internet can offer people. And so if we go and not really, we have a mix of humans and AIs and you can't tell which is which, you end up having, I think, the risk for an unhealthy relationship with some of these computers and some of these bots. In fact, I think character AI has had issues with this because of the way that, you know, some of the content that comes out of this sounds like a human and you can't really tell, and it pretends to be one. I think what we're encountering now with AI is the ability for all of the internet, the internet information that we had before, that we would collect in a library of sorts, can now speak for itself. And so we have now condensed the information on the internet to make it conversational, which means that where the internet's primary function in the past was for humans to communicate with other humans through it, now
Hmm.
we're seeing a change in the internet's function to be primarily a place where the human interacts with the internet, not just through it to another human. And what does that mean about human to human conversation through the internet? Well, like you were saying, the trust is down. We can't trust that it is another human. And so maybe there's a bit of a separation there. Maybe what comes next is human to human conversation is in real life, and human to internet conversation becomes the primary value of the internet.
Yeah, I think that's a very important observation. Some people will be profoundly chilled by it, but I think it's true. As you say, the internet now is becoming, I don't know if it's the platform or a world of machines, but their knowledge is our collective wisdom. I had Douglas Rushkoff on the show a couple of weeks ago, very influential techno futurist from a different generation too. He made a kind of McLuhan-esque remark that suggested that with AI, finally, the internet has a native app. Do you think he's onto something there?
I think, you know, yes, I certainly can see that. The language of what is an app and what is not an app, I think, depends on the person. But in the
Well,
sense,
maybe not even. I mean, the issue is native rather than app. So it could be something, it's got something native. For the first time with AI, we have something that as a medium reflects the message, if you like, or the medium and the message have come together.
yes, yeah, I guess I tend to keep it very literal when describing it because it's so hard to go into the abstract and have implications towards it. And so the very literal thing, in my view, is that the internet used to be the collection, the archive of our information, and now it has itself obtained an interface that allows us to extract from it in a way that we would normally extract information from other humans.
Yeah, it's acquired a voice.
Yes, a voice. There you go. That's right. And multiple voices, right?
So,
We've
Michael,
created a way to turn, yeah.
sorry, go on.
We've created a way to turn the collection of information on the internet into a voice that can be spoken to.
So some people will be thinking, well, this is all very well, but you know, the internet now has a voice. Michael looks human, sounds human, but maybe he isn't. How would you? And I sometimes ask my guests on the show who are talking about AI and this shift to a smart machine age. How would you prove that you were human? Of course, in movies like Blade Runner, it was
I
very
can't.
hard.
I can't prove it. That's the truth. Is we're reaching a point where I can't prove it.
So you
There's
could be
no
a bot.
what? I'm sorry.
You could be a bot.
Yes, I mean I could.
And I could be
And
one too, Michael, right?
that's right. And there's no way to prove it. The problem is this is kind of like a nuke for the internet in terms of human to human conversation, because how can you prove that anybody on the internet that you're communicating with is not a bot at this point? I don't think it's possible, right? Maybe the way you'd have to do it is if you see the person in real life and then 3 seconds later you like see them on the phone. But it's a problem and it's messy because when I talk to my friends on iMessage, Apple released a feature that allows me to generate an AI response back to my friend without me having to think of what to respond. And so if the AI is generating my response to my friend, even if it's me the one sending it, is that really me talking? Right. And so that question of who I am as a person contributing to the conversations on the internet is an open one as well. And so when you think about all of that, the real proof that someone's a human at this point is if I see them in person. And yeah, and that doesn't mean that the internet doesn't have value. Of course it does. That means the internet has a totally different type of value, though. One that is not about, verifying that a human is around or anything like that.
Yeah, we're getting beyond that. I'm not sure if you're familiar with the philosophy of Descartes, whose philosophical system and the whole Enlightenment infrastructure was based on proving the existence of oneself and therefore knowledge. But as you suggest, we're in a post-Cartesian age where we don't even know who we are. So where do we get knowledge from? Where do we find truth? Maybe those words aren't appropriate anymore.
Yeah, I think for the longest time, there are so many things about the world that are subjective that for maybe a brief period of time, we did not know were subjective. And we're starting to get to a point where we're starting to see the subjectivity in so many different topics. And I think that scares a lot of people. I think that scares me, to see some of that stuff. I think it's also a little scary to just think about what the implications of that means, right? But in terms of humans and the value we get from each other and how we're able to communicate, we did just fine before the internet and being able to talk to each other and see each other in real life and have those connections. We had libraries that we could go into, but we were under no illusion that the book that we were reading was a human. We know that it was translated by humans and put into words on a book, but the book itself is not a human. And so for the longest time, we had this gathering place online that is now turned into more of a library. And so we're going to go back to that time, maybe, when we talk to people in real life, and the internet serves as that place where we get the information. And we're under no illusion that the information we're receiving is from a human. And in many ways, that might be healthier.
What about coming back to your generation, Michael? There's a nostalgia, I know, in part for an analog age. Vinyl, for example, has been popularized by your generation. Older people buy vinyl, but it's the young people who are driving its popularity. Handwriting, lots of other remnants, if you like, of the analog age. Do you expect this world that you're describing to also trigger an intense nostalgia and love for a pre-internet age? And will that be driven by young people?
Yes, I don't even think it'll be driven by nostalgia because so many people, younger people, don't even remember a time when these things existed. I think it'll be primarily driven through a need for human connection, where they're not able to get that on the internet anymore. And so if I go on the internet and I see AI generated content, or I'm not sure if the person that I'm talking to is using an AI model, I'm going to want to talk to that person in real life. And that increases the amount of conversations that I'm having in real life that I wouldn't have had otherwise if I was certain that the communication I was having on the internet was authentic. And so I actually think the AI is maybe pushing us a little bit more to be with each other in real life. And I think there's going to be a real need for that. And that's probably growing. And I think it kind of, you can start to see a little bit of that in the way that a lot of modern dating apps online are really struggling to be used. And young people are kind of rejecting these dating apps and going back to meeting people in real life and setting up events online where they can then go and meet in person. There's a lot of this happening, and I think it'll continue.
You talk about something called real life, Michael, but what happens when chips are put inside us? What happens when I know Meta, which you've rejoined, is one of the pioneers of the metaverse, although they seem to be more focused on AI now.
Yeah.
Are you confident with this term, real life?
I use these terms because they're easy to understand, I think, for most people. I think I use these terms because um, it's an easy way to translate the information I'm trying to share with people. But in all honesty, a lot of these terms are shifting every day. What it means to be in real life is very different every year that a new technology comes out. Was different 10,000 years ago, was different 1,000, and different now. I think that the big shift, though, is the rate of change accelerating to a point where it's harder and harder because our lifespan is about the same. So if our lifespans are the same and our generations and the years between them are the same, but the rate of change continues to accelerate beyond what each generation is able to live in one lifetime, then I think we start entering a bit of a confusion because we start to see it changing faster than we're able to live through it.
Certainly exciting times, and exciting times for you too. You've, after what you call the success of social AI, you've rejoined Meta. Meta now is one of the great pioneers of AI. Apparently, Meta AI has 600 million monthly users. They're pioneering a llama model, which I think is more open source than some of the other AIs. Tell me more about your return to Facebook, and what are you doing there now?
I'm really excited about it. I primarily am working on generative AI. So um, my I think my excitement for rejoining kind of stems from two things. One, I think the technology is really cool, and like I was saying earlier, it has its pros and its cons, but I think it's going to accelerate a lot of potential for each person. I grew up building apps as a kid only because I could use the internet to look up how to do it, and that really helped my family when we were struggling. And I feel like AI is only serving to expand the ability for so many other kids out there, regardless of where they are, to learn how to code and to be able to build their own tools and build their own lives and be creative and have that potential. The second thing is I used to work there when I was a kid. So I started working at Facebook when I was like 17, 18 years old. And that was really my first job. And in many ways, I wish I would have had the formal education prior to joining the workforce. But in others, I'm super grateful for having had that opportunity to like be exposed to the tech world and seeing just where things are going at that age. Really kind of helped shape me and really helped kind of give me perspective on what it's like to work at these different companies. And so coming back has been pretty fun just to catch up with a bunch of old coworkers and see how they're all doing and yeah, and get to work on a bunch of stuff.
As I said, you claim that there was the success of social AI. Where is it now? What happened to it? Did you sell
Well,
it?
yeah, so I'm winding it down at this point, mostly because I think a lot of the value that we're going to see from social AI is probably going to be integrated into Meta soon. We'll see how that goes. But
So was it a kind of acqui-hire from Meta that they bought you and social AI together?
well, the details of it are kind of fuzzy,
Well,
but
you can tell me, Michael. I don't know.
I wish I could. But I will say the the conversation around what was built out and what may come of what Meta builds, I think is pretty interesting, and it's exciting to see where it can go. In terms of the success of it, what I found was so fascinating to me was for the longest time I always tried to build apps and tried to pitch them and try to sell why it is, and here's the reason why you should check this out. And for this, it was like within a week, we got 30,000 downloads, people downloading, using it. Over 5 million different AI generated comments were created on the various accounts of all of the users who signed up. And people like my own mom, who barely speaks English, works at a furniture store and speaks Spanish, was telling me that this was one of the first apps of mine that she was genuinely using and using it to like deal with her, issues with her, like coworkers or any problems that are arising. And it really kind of a good therapy type use case where she would post about how she was doing on different things, and the app would respond with thousands and thousands of different perspectives on how to handle a situation. Fundamentally, the big learning from social AI is that a chatbot interface for AI gives you one response, one truth, right? And as we talked about, the truth isn't really there for a lot of these questions. Where I should go for dinner, or where should I go on vacation, or should I move to one city or another? There's no right, true, correct answer. There are many perspectives, and it's up to me to want to decide what I want to do. And so giving people that flexibility and that honesty through an interface that gives you multiple responses is really kind of the breakthrough with social AI that I'm just excited to see how it expands in the rest of the industry.
I mentioned Jonathan Taplin being on the show. One of his other books was Move Fast and Break Things, of course, a satirical use of what Mark Zuckerberg said. Mark Zuckerberg at Meta, which used to be called Facebook, is an expert at moving fast and perhaps breaking things. He went from social media to the metaverse and now to AI. What do you make of the narrative of Facebook since you left and returned? And what does Facebook offer different from some of the other players, Anthropic, OpenAI, Gemini? Is the llama model different? I mean, Zuckerberg talks about this open source technology. I'm always a bit wary of what Zuckerberg says because, of course, he's a very, very rich man. He's a multi-billionaire, one of the richest men in the world, and he's not in the business of giving away anything for free. What do you make of the Facebook story recently?
I think open sourcing these models is a good thing. I think OpenAI in the name almost makes it sound like they will open source some things, right? It's OpenAI, but I guess not.
And of course, Elon Musk is actually suing OpenAI for that very reason.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. For me, I see the value in open sourcing these mostly because I think there's so many applications to the technology that a lot of people would love to be able to build. And what's challenging with AI models is that you actually need a lot of resources to train them. And so having vast data centers where you have tons of GPUs training data so that you're able to come up with the proper weights and have these models work effectively is expensive, and it takes a lot of work to do it. Not anyone can just do that. But if you're able to open source those models, you're then able to grab the output of that expensive work and allow other people around the world to come up with ways to use it. So I think it's a great potential. That being said, I do think that when it comes to what Meta's strengths are in this kind of AI race, if you will, is fundamentally on the social layer. I think Facebook for the longest time has understood a lot about how people have this desire to connect with each other and how to find answers to questions that maybe Google hasn't done in the same way. You find that Google's approach to queries tends to be to help you find the correct answer. Whereas Facebook and Instagram and these other platforms have really been a place where you ask the most subjective questions. You ask the things for opinions about where to go and what to do in ways where there is not one answer, but you want to hear from your friends or you want to hear from other people about a vast variety of perspectives. And so knowing that the AI models themselves do not have the correct answer to anything, but rather are representations of a lot of the data and a lot of the answers that we give online between each other, makes it feel like such a natural alignment of use case, as opposed to maybe trying to be a new source of truth, which I just don't think is feasible at the current technological state.
Yeah, it's interesting that you talk about this merging of social media and AI. Of course, Facebook has the data, and we post on Facebook. Facebook has multi-billion points of data on all of us because we tell it what we're doing, who we are. Finally, Michael, you said that people need to be educated about social media. Do you think if they knew that all this data was being used by companies like Facebook to build smart bots, they would still do it? They would be chilled by that?
I think the way I see it is if people understand how social media works and how the businesses are run, I think they would be less afraid than they are, I think, when they don't understand how anything works. I think if they understand then what how the AIs work, where they get their information from and how they're built, I think they'd be more excited about it too. And if anything, they might be able to come up with ways in which we can build better AI models that serve more needs. Fundamentally, the problems that I see with a lot of this stuff come to a lack of education, in my view. And the more we can educate people around what is possible and how they work, I think the more potential we have for actually building value out of them.
Well, Michael Sayman, you're the author of The App Kid. You might be the bot kid. You can't.
We don't know.
We don't know. I don't know. You've undermined my own confidence, not only in you, but in myself. Maybe I'm a bot. I think I sometimes sound like one. But it's a real honor to talk to you. You're the voice, one of the voices of your generation. You make a lot of sense. We'll have to get you back on the show. Keep thinking, working. Michael, you're an important figure in the evolving AI metaverse universe. Thank you so much.
I appreciate it. Thank you so much.